Here are two questions. Why did screenwriter Shane Black not work for 9 years after his film The Long Kiss Goodnight? And coincidentally, maybe, if you've got a creative project, how can you focus on and complete it? I'll attempt to answer those questions in episode 72 of The Carl King Show. Understanding is useful, so here we go. I'm Carl King, and this is The Carl King Show, where every week, almost, we learn about music, filmmaking, and creativity. If you like this show, head over to patreon.com/Carl King and join for just $1 or $5 per month. Or send a tip through PayPal or Venmo to username Carl Kingdom. Special thank you to my Illusionist $51 level patrons, Hank Howard III, Sean Motley, and Chubode. Quick shout out to my music endorsements, Vienna Symphonic Library, Fractal Audio, Ernie Ball Strings, Tune Track, and Millennium Media. Now, let's get this episode beginned. Just a few Carl King the Human updates, and then we will officially get beginned. Number 1, my road bike, which I named Ramsey 2, was destroyed last week by a negligent human. A large, heavy object was dropped on it, compromising the frame. Through the years, I rode a total of 2,356 miles on it, which is approximately the distance across the United States. Disclaimer though, that's not actually a long distance in the world of road cycling, but it was dang good exercise for Carl King. While I'm in the process of filing an insurance claim, I immediately ordered a new road bike in the same basic model, another specialized Alley, but in Oracle of Outer Space Green, and named it Ramsey 3. And I took it out this weekend for my first 50-mile ride, which is also called a half century. That ride took me a total of 5.5 hours, but only because 1.5 hours of that were spent riding back and forth to the bike shop, diagnosing a ticking sound or clicking sound in the front wheel. After many adjustments and finally replacing the entire front wheel, I rode for 4 more hours and completed the goal. Number 2, with all this recent exercise, including my morning hikes, while wearing a Go Ruck brand rucksack, I've lost just about 19 pounds of fat. So congratulations to me and my health. And if you don't know what a rucksack is, I'll put a link in the show notes. And number 3, this weekend I attended an underground art gallery exhibit in downtown Los Angeles. It was hosted by P.S. Kaufman Footwear, put on by gallerist Jessica Jarrell, aka Kiva, and it featured the artists Gino Perez, Steve Saiz, and Jason Borders. And as extra credit, I even hung out with some wizards. My 2 favorite paintings of the evening were this sort of dog creature by Gino Perez and a painting of Jello Biafra by Jason Borders. And I'll put the links to the Instagrams of all of those artists in the show notes. And now let's move on to this week's analytical filmmaking analysis of the week. This week's analytical filmmaking analysis of the week is The Long Kiss Goodnight, screenwrited by Shane Black and directed by Rennie Harlan. Whoever that is. Now, somehow I'd never seen this movie, and I only recently learned about its existence while eating dinner in a sushi place in Hollywood with my friend Henrik Linde. And it was playing on a TV across the room, and I thought, what the heck is that? Well, Here's what the heck that is. It is a Type 1, and it stars Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson. For historical context, it's from 1996, only 2 years after Pulp Fiction, but 8 years after Beetlejuice. Being a 90s movie, it has an alternative grunge edge to it, but it is still very much an 80s-style action movie. In my own totally subjective opinion, the best things about this movie are the acting duo of Davis and Jackson and the dry, witty, non-sequitur dialogue that they speak. If you're interested, the main characters have what could be called a cute meanness. So in this world that Shane Black created, everyone is clever and sarcastic. Now, here are 5 of my favorite lines or exchanges. Number 1, Gina Davis says to the Succession dad, "You're Waldman." And he responds, "No, I'm the Hills Brothers bean buyer." Number 2, Samuel L. Jackson says, "Everyone knows that when you make an assumption, you make an ass out of you and umption." Number 3, Gina Davis says to Samuel L. Jackson, "Were you always this stupid, or did you take lessons?" And Samuel L. Jackson responds proudly, "I took lessons." Number 4, Samuel L. Jackson says to Succession dad, "We jumped out of a building." And Succession dad responds, "Yes, it was very exciting. Tomorrow we go to the zoo." And number 5, Samuel L. Jackson asks the Succession dad, "How did you find us?" And Succession dad responds, "There may be many reasons not to kill you, but among them is not that you'll be missed by NASA. I found the address in your coat, here, between the address of a topless bar and the picture of what looks like a man's penis." And Samuel L. Jackson responds, "That's a duck, not a dick." And Succession dad looks unamused and throws it away. And looking closely, it sure does look like a duck. The dialogue style here is very Raymond Chandler, and he was a detective fiction novelist born in the 1800s. And according to the internet, Raymond Chandler happens to be one of Shane Black's 2 favorite noir authors. And unrelated, if you're interested, the film The Big Lebowski by the Coen brothers was heavily influenced by Raymond Chandler's novel The Big Sleep. But with a twist, they put a confused, bewildered stoner in the detective role. Back to our movie. When the Long Kiss Goodnight begins, rather than an intense, action-packed teaser opening scene that you'd see in modern movies, it's a mysterious, slow credit montage. And that's typical of an era when viewers had longer attention spans. Now, we know it's going to be some kind of a dark murder thing, but there's a tonal contrast here. This story takes place during Christmas time, like Die Hard from 1988. But hang on, Die Hard was actually not screenwritten by Shane Black, and all this time, I thought it was. However, Shane Black did screenwrite Lethal Weapon from 1987, and according to the internet, that's why Die Hard was also set during Christmas time. Of course, the internet is never wrong. Now, from what I've read, it seems that this dark action movie during Christmas kind of thing is considered a screenwriter's trademark, since several of Shane Black's movies are set during the holidays. And the next scene we get reminded me of David Lynch's Blue Velvet. Everyone's happy in the little town, and Gina Davis is on a float in the Christmas parade playing Mrs. Claus. And we hear a happy Christmas song performed by Elvis. Now, in screenwriting classes, they tell you to avoid voiceovers. And there's a reason for that. It's self-conscious, and it disconnects the viewer from the immediacy of the story. It's as if the ideal experience is to feel you are actually there watching the events, all happening in the moment. And a voiceover is like a friend pausing the movie, pulling you out of it and explaining it to you, telling you information rather than you being immersed in it. So when you do use a voiceover, it's better to make it special. In this movie, it's at least clever. And it starts at 3 minutes 30 seconds with, "My name is Samantha Kane." At least I think it is. "You might not believe it to look at me, but I was born only 8 years ago." And this is simply to convey she's got amnesia. A more amateur version of that could have been straight up factual exposition, like, "My name is Samantha Kane, and I have amnesia." Unfortunately, that's how a lot of exposition is written, so watch out for that. Now later, the voiceover device is abandoned, and I think the final line of voiceover might be, "The woman I was, the one I used to be, she's gone. I've kissed her goodnight," which is a nice place to end the voiceover, indirectly explaining the title of the film. Now, something else I want to point out. I was reminded of David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, which was released 5 years later in 2001. And that's because in that film, there's a girl who gets in a car accident and loses her memory. And much like in Mulholland Drive, she changes her hairstyle to a short blonde bob. Let's talk about Geena Davis's character. They set her up as extremely bubbly and fun in the first few scenes. They really lean into how playful she is with her family. So lighthearted with the laughing and the jokes. And that's a strong choice because later, as she regains her memory, or as Charlie emerges, it contrasts with her assassin abilities and dark personality. But it's inconsistent. It feels like Charlie isn't really a solid character. Now let's move on to some implausibilities, which is where common sense physics and psychology are defied. Impossible things happen, and people behave counter to how they would in the real world. First of all, when the one-eyed Jack bad guy shows up at her house, he shoots at her with some sort of grenade launcher, which blows a hole in the wall of her house. And she grabs her daughter and throws her out the hole in the wall into the daughter's treehouse. Now, when I first saw that, I wondered, how did that guy just shoot a giant hole in the wall? And after I read that he was actually using a grenade launcher, I thought, that doesn't seem like such a good idea to use indoors. But I could be wrong. And second, at the end of the fight, she defeats him with a pie to the face. That's right. Like in the circus, she reaches down onto her counter and slaps him in the face with a pie. So after all that fighting, that finally does the trick, and it knocks him out cold. And then she goes over and snaps his neck. On the psychological side of the implausibilities, there's no way that family would stay in that house. They decide the mom should go on a road trip with a questionable private investigator / ex-con right after that violent home invasion, which was a severely traumatic experience. So a dude broke in and shot up the house with a grenade launcher, and the mom killed him on the kitchen floor, and there's no investigation, nothing. It's just another day, I guess. So her boyfriend says, "Do what you need to do." So she heads out on a road trip with Samuel L. Jackson, and her boyfriend just stays in that house with her daughter like nothing happened. There's no way. Moving on. When they head out on the road, there's some very odd dialogue in the car. Samuel L. Jackson swerves off the road when he drives past an attractive woman jogging. And it seems to me that that scene didn't need to be there at all because it is a non sequitur. Now, when I see a scene like that, I have to wonder if it relates to a later scene that actually got deleted. And that's because scenes are expensive to shoot. Movie productions try to save money, and if it doesn't serve a purpose to the story, there's no reason to shoot it. And then we arrive at the first scene with the Succession dad, and he makes a complaint about his wife's dog licking its butthole for 3 hours. And that has nothing to do with the plot. It's just plain old funny. Later on, I can't remember how, but there's a scene where Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson jump out of a building to escape an explosion caused by a grenade. And somehow the grenade blows fire down the entire hallway in slow motion like a flamethrower. And it looks like a dragon shooting fire out of the side of the building. Now, according to the internet, this is not how fragmentation grenades work. Instead, they blow metal pieces in every direction, not a sustained stream of fire. The explosion from that single grenade sure seemed unrealistic to me. Now, when they meet up with Succession Dad after that, they decide to beat the hell out of him and take his Cadillac, seemingly only for the purpose of complicating and extending the plot. So they drive off, and they go find the guy that Gina Davis was going to marry when she was her previous persona. And this is another implausibility. The guy doesn't act appropriately to the situation of having a gun point blank in his face. And that's one of those, this is not how humans behave in real life type writing problems. Overall, the action throughout this movie can be described as cartoony. When writing and directing, you have to consider how these ideas are going to be executed. Sometimes it feels like no one raised their hand and asked, how does this scene physically make sense? And for instance, there's another scene where they have a gunfight in an alley, and in the background, people continue to walk by on the street like nothing is happening. At a total running time of 2 hours, this is a long movie. And in the third act, they added in a false flag terrorist attack, which made the plot too complicated in my own totally subjective opinion. It felt like, oh, now this is happening too? And then there's that whole thing where the baby doll's pee is flammable. I might have missed something, but I guess Gina Davis filled the baby doll with gasoline or some other fuel. Now, I'm not a chemist, but I'd be a little worried that the gasoline would corrode the rubber and plastic that the baby doll is made out of. And then why did the kid keep a pair of matches in her cast? I know this was introduced earlier on in the story, but it just felt shoehorned in. So basically Shane Black, or the director, went back and planted those things earlier in the story so they'd be useful later in getting the characters out of trouble. And that final action scene was over the line absurd with the cars falling out of the sky, and I just could not help but laugh. My suspension of disbelief had by that time been suspended. Now, this movie did so poorly at the box office that Shane Black didn't work in Hollywood for something like 9 years until his next film, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, in 2005. But as everyone knows, you can't complain about a beloved cult film, and in my own totally subjective opinion, I enjoyed it, and I would happily watch it again. So I gave The Long Kiss Goodnight 5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. And now let's move on to this week's motivational creative career motivation of the week. This week's motivational creative career motivation of the week is creative projects, how to focus on and complete them. In a recent Patreon Zoom hangout, my friend Carence brought up a topic. How does one stay focused and finish a creative project? He said he's set up a home studio, he's got everything he needs, and is ready to go, but he can't quite make progress. He said he gets lost in the tiny details, trying out sounds, experimenting with plugins, and messing with effects, and at the end of the day, he feels he's got nothing to show for it. Well, somehow I've never had a problem with this. Most of my projects get finished, even if I need to take a hiatus or switch to something else for a while. You know, like for the past 3 months. These things happen, But there are tricks that have helped me, and here they are. Number one, start from the end result and work backwards. This can also be called top-down creativity. So open up a text document and type out a clear description of what you intend to make. If it's a song, what are the instruments? How long is it? And what is it about? What is the central purpose? Be specific about that. And as you work, if something doesn't support that original end result, just don't do it. Get yourself back on track. Number two, separate the technical from the creative. It's hard for me to switch modes. I like to get into a creative flow and not be disturbed by technology problems. So when possible, I get all of that out of the way before diving into the project. I like to set up and check my gear, change my strings, and plug everything in the day before. It's like a sound check, even when simply working at home by myself, because it ruins my vibe to be untangling cables and starting to work and wondering, why is there no sound coming out? Number three, you have to start. Complicated metal guitarist Pete Peterson keeps his recording project open on his computer so that every time he walks by it, he's reminded to sit down and mess with it. Now, I don't do that, but I schedule the time in my calendar so it feels as important as any other kind of work I need to do. And on that day, I pick the best idea I have and I go with it. And it doesn't need to be the best idea in the world. Just get it going. Number four, failure is good. So embrace trial and error. It's how you arrive at what will work. Write the 10 bad songs or 100 bad songs to get to the good ones. You can't fix something you haven't written. So accept that this is an iterative process. Create multiple drafts, each better than the previous. I've written and recorded probably 500 pieces of music. Once you've done this process hundreds of times, parts of it become extremely easy, and 90% of it becomes a habit. So commit to the process of wrong, 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 better, 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 good, because it's almost always like that. And if a song really is just too bad to fix, feel free to just throw it away and move on to the next one without regrets. I can sometimes get 3 good songs in the time it takes to fix a bad one. Number 5, use constraints. Now those can be material limits, time limits, a deadline, and it also helps to accept some cliches and forms and templates because they help. Limericks and haikus have rules, and that's what makes them fun and challenging. Here's a great quote from Frank Zappa. "The most important thing in art is the frame. For painting, literally. For other arts, figuratively. Because without this humble appliance, you can't know where the art stops and the real world begins. You have to put a box around it, because otherwise, what is that shit on the wall?" So these days when writing music, the frame I simply start with is duration and tempo, and I can put anything inside that. Number 6, it's good enough. Everything I do, I have to say, that's fine, that does the job, and ship it, because anything can be worked on forever and ever. It ends up being diminishing returns. You have to stop and say, nothing I will do beyond this point will matter to anyone. No one is going to notice this. And that allows you to move on to the next project. There's actually something called the Cult of Done Manifesto, which says, done is the engine of more. And it very much aligns with the things that I'm saying here. Number 7, enjoy the process. Now, this is a tough one for me, but sometimes I have to force myself to. There's a Kurt Vonnegut quote, "If this isn't nice, what is?" It's sort of a type of gratitude. And there are so many worse things that could be happening right now. And we are lucky to be creative at all. Okay, that's the end of this episode of the Carl King Show. Remember to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or anywhere else you consume these dang episodes. And if you like this show, support the creation of more episodes by joining my Patreon for $1 or $5 a month. That's patreon.com/Carl King. Or send a tip through PayPal or Venmo to username Carl Kingdom. Thank you to my little production team, my script editor Chris Higgins, and my transcriptionist Eric Alexander Moore. My Patreon patrons help me to also pay those guys. And a special thank you to my $51 a month patrons at the special illusionist level, Chubode, Sean Motley, and Hank Howard III. And thank you to all of the very good friends of Carl King for joining me. And as I always say, I don't know anything.